This is a mindfulness practice to develop skills to respond more effectively to feelings associated with negative self-talk and depression. We can think of depression as a lack of energy and motivation that is coupled with a negative thought pattern. In depression, the impulse is often to stay in bed, cancel plans, silence your voice, or give up on things that once mattered. When experiencing a depressed mood, we are far more likely to feel irritable, frustrated, and lock into a loop of dark and negative thoughts about ourselves and life in general. One of the functions of the human mind is to create labels for all of the inner experiences that we call emotions. There are over 500 words for different emotions. And what are all of these words? Aren't they all just terms to describe a different feeling and sensation? It is easy to understand why emotions and feelings are words that carry the same meaning. Emotions are feelings, in that we feel them internally, inside of our bodies, as it does with all emotions. The thinking mind labels a particular constellation of feelings and sensations as depression. It is also the thinking mind that then automatically goes into problem-solving mode and begins listing off all areas of life where you may be unhappy and the reason for the depression. It is this negative loop of a thought pattern that reinforces the feeling of negativity and depression. Feeling depressed is a very unpleasant experience. Many people who find themselves caught up in depression usually attempt to take some sort of action to relieve this terrible feeling, usually to no avail, or they just sit in it and hope that it passes over. What I want to do now is introduce a practice that is a much more effective strategy for dealing with the feelings of depression. Maybe you don't call it depression, but have a different word for it. The thinking mind has a knack for creating descriptive labels. You may call it being negative, or not liking yourself, or going into a dark place. Handling this experience, whatever you refer to it as being, starts with acknowledgement. Silently say to yourself, I'm noticing that I am having an inner experience that my mind calls depression, or whatever your mind calls it. It is then very useful to engage the part of your mind that is able to observe direct experience. Use this part of your mind to direct the spotlight of attention onto the feeling that you call depression, which is occurring inside of your body. I think of emotions as a type of internal energy, but with depression, it seems more accurate to describe it as a lack of energy, a feeling of fatigue and lethargy, and accompanied with a very negative pattern of thought. Our attention is all at once a spotlight, and a magnifier, and an amplifier. Whatever we focus on lights up brighter, gets much bigger and louder, and crowds out most everything else. When we notice a thought about being depressed, it is helpful to use our observing mind and direct our attention away from the thoughts about depression and toward the direct experience of the sensation that we refer to as depression. Again, it is very important to remember that the thought of being depressed leads automatically to thoughts about the reasons for depression, which only creates more depression, the complete opposite of what we want. So the point is to shift the focus of attention on the feeling, rather than the thoughts about the feeling. This will not make the feeling of depression vanish entirely. That would be nice, but it will not be the case. What it will do is put a stop to the looping pattern of thought that only makes the depression worse. And by doing so, you will then be better able to focus outward and see if there are any actions that can be taken in the present moment that can be helpful to alleviate the feeling of depression. There is a great saying, If you move a muscle, you will change a thought. Because most people experience depression like a lack of energy, it is often very difficult to take any action at all. For more serious forms of depression, it is not only a feeling of being depleted of all energy, but it can actually feel painful to get up and move. I've heard it described as attempting to walk while waist deep in wet cement. And not only that, but that in the cement are shards of broken glass. So not only is it difficult to slog through, but the movement is also painful. But I still say, focus outward and look around wherever you are, and take an action to make an improvement. Push through the resistance and the pain, even as you feel very little energy and motivation. Do it anyway. Once you complete even the simplest of tasks, you will feel a sense of reward and a little more energized to move on to the next task. And so it goes. Another thing to consider are other possible reasons for experiencing the sensations that are associated with depression. Physiological reasons, like being overtired from lack of sleep, or experiencing a crash after consuming a large amount of caffeine or processed food, or maybe not being adequately hydrated. Sometimes we just don't feel all that good. No one feels good all of the time. But when we start going in and getting caught up in a loop of negative thoughts and focus on all areas of life that we are unhappy about, a small ripple turns into a giant wave that can swallow us up. If I find myself feeling like I don't have a lot of energy and little motivation, I think to myself that for all I know, I might be fighting off a cold-like virus, and this feeling of lethargy is just a symptom. I think of this example because I recall that back in 2021, well into the second year of the COVID pandemic, my daughter came home from school saying she didn't feel good. This was a time when there was an abundance of at-home COVID tests. So she took the test, and it was confirmed that she did have COVID. Because everyone in the house was in close contact, we all took a COVID test. The test that I took was negative, but the following day, I felt a little fatigued. So I took another test, and that one came back positive. I then went along with what was recommended at that time. 5 days self-quarantine in my bedroom, and then retesting to be sure I was no longer carrying the virus. Throughout these 5 days, the only symptom I experienced was moderate fatigue, very low energy. While it wasn't very pleasant, I wasn't psychologically distressed because I knew this feeling of fatigue was from my immune system fighting off a virus, and that it would improve and pass away entirely in just a few days. After this experience, a question occurred to me. How would my mind describe the experience if I wasn't aware that I had COVID? I didn't experience symptoms that I would typically associate with a flu-like virus. No sore throat, fever, body aches, cough, or congestion. Just very tired, feeling very little energy, and did not want to get out of bed. Had I felt that way at any time before COVID, I would not have thought twice about getting up and going to work. I am certain that my mind would have told me, and I would have convinced myself, that I was depressed. Then I'm sure my mind would have tried to answer the question, why am I depressed? I then would have focused on the areas in my life that I might be unhappy with. Maybe something related to my job, not having enough money, my relationships, whatever, and all of the things I don't like. I call this stinkin' thinkin', which only exacerbates the feeling of depression, Or maybe I would have focused on a thought that something is inherently wrong with my brain, a chemical imbalance. All of this would have been going on in my problem-solving thinking mind, when in reality I felt crummy because of a virus. This was a lesson for me to notice thoughts, especially thoughts that describe emotions, and whenever I'm not feeling particularly great, it is best to consider all of the factors that may be contributing to the experience. When we can identify these factors in how we are feeling at any given moment, it is helpful because we can take effective action on them. If we are overtired from inadequate sleep, we may not be able to lay down and take a nap right then and there, but you can commit to do everything possible that evening to get to bed early and maximize sleep time. But what do we do when depression pushes us to stay still and our values pull us toward engagement? We don't want to lock into a tug-of-war with the depression, because when we attempt to suppress or force away the heaviness, this only increases the internal pressure until it becomes overwhelming. The aim is to create psychological space for the depression. When we create space, we allow the depression to exist without us having to obey it, and take direct and effective actions that move us in the direction of our personal values. The first thing to do is to just notice and then observe the inner experience that you would refer to as depression. It is very helpful to be able to notice the thoughts that describe the experience. Notice how the very structure of our language around emotions influences the experience of the emotion. Consider the following statements. I am depressed. I am anxious. I am sad. I am angry. These statements are very common, and what they suggest is that we are the emotion. You are not depression, just like you are not any particular emotion. You are a person who, in those moments, is having an inner experience that may be described as depression. Or better yet, you are a person who is noticing an inner experience that your mind calls depression. This may sound like one big word game, but when put into practice, it becomes obvious that how we think about an experience greatly influences the degree and level of intensity of the experience. We can learn to be more effective and less powerless over these moods. The first step is to not get caught up in mental descriptions, because that is engaging your thinking self. Here you want to be a pure observer. Maybe you don't think of it as depression and you use a different term. You might say you are spiraling, very negative, or in a dark place. If that is the case, still go through this sequence. Only replace the word depression with whatever you call the experience. In the beginning of this practice, it might go something like this. You might first just notice the thought, I am depressed. Then you state, I am noticing a thought that I am depressed. And lastly, I am noticing myself have a thought that I am depressed. Then immediately shift the spotlight of your attention away from the thought of being depressed and onto the direct experience of the depression itself, as it is occurring in your body at that time. Then take a very long and very deep breath, and as you do, try to imagine the breath expanding the area where you are experiencing the heaviness. And then sit back, observe the feeling of the depression with a sense of openness and curiosity, like it was an exhibit in a zoo, and you are in the observation deck, safe and set apart from it, so it can't pull you under. As you observe the experience, if the heaviness continues to appear to increase and intensify, Take a few more long and deep breaths, continuing to visualize each breath entering into and expanding the space around where you are experiencing the weight. This is not an attempt to alter, push away, or in any way control the feelings associated with the heaviness, but rather we are now creating more space around it. You can then shift the focus of attention to your direct environment by looking around wherever you may be in that moment, and ask yourself this question: what is the most helpful and useful action that I can take at this very instant? Once you identify a useful action, get up and do it, even if your mind continues to try to convince you not to. And once you complete a productive task, immediately look to do another and then another. As you become better trained in this, you will find yourself better equipped to stay steady even when your energy feels low. Over time, these depressive surges will emerge less frequently and carry less power over your life.